Today's presentation will begin in 2 minutes.
Yeah.
Good afternoon and welcome to this week's Improving Talks. Some housekeeping data. If you want to post questions, please do so in the Q&A section. There should be a Q&A button there that you can click and post a question there, and the presenter will get to the question during the course of the presentation. Today's presenter is Claudio La Sala. Claudio is the technical director at Improving. He has been with Improving for 7 years. Claudio has extensive experience with the .NET stack, behavior-driven development, test-driven development. Claudio's a musician. He plays guitar, bass, the drums, does vocals, and probably plays some other instruments I don't know about. He's also an avid motorcyclist and runs a group called Beyond the Track that meets at various tracks around the Houston area. The title of today's talk is BDD, but not the way you heard it before. Without further ado, here's Claudio La Sala.
Outstanding. Thanks, Mike. That was an awesome intro. Appreciate it. Hello, everybody. Thanks for taking some time out of your day to join us today to check out this talk. Appreciate that. Yeah, the reason for the talk to be, BDD, but not the way you heard it before. I promise you it's going to be very unique. It's going to be a BDD talk delivered in a Brazilian-Texan accent. You don't get to hear that every day. So this talk will guarantee to be unique. And hopefully you're going to be able to learn, a couple of things out of this. As Mike said, I've been with Improving for quite some time now. I'm a technical director. I've been building software since the mid-90s, roughly. have my passions, as Mike said. So I don't just do the programming thing, but I actually try to live a very whole life. And the reason why I mention that is because it's going to come up as part of this talk. Because a few weeks ago, or not weeks ago, I'm sorry, a few months ago, sometime mid last year, actually. Now the year is almost over. But I've been reading, several books on very diverse topics, and I have this habit of like walking up to a drawing board or picking up something that I can write on to start drawing arrows for the different and similar concepts that I get from these books, and trying to find different relationships between them, because I do appreciate looking at topics that I'm interested in and looking at it through different angles. Even if it's something that I like, oh yeah, I've been doing this for many years now. I think I got a good hang on of it, but maybe I've been watching it from one angle. When I go around the thing, I start seeing things that I was not seeing before. And with BDD, it has been like that, where I approached BDD several years ago from one angle, and then next thing I know, I'm, experimenting different approaches and tools and techniques, and then I'm reading other literature that not necessarily have anything to do with BDD, but I can somehow like bring that knowledge and throw it in the mixing pot, and just have the whole experience become better, get improved. So as I've made some of these connections last year, I ended up putting together a lightning talk for one of our internal groups, a community on UX, right? So I'm coming from a software development standpoint, and then I put together a lightning talk touching on some of these subjects, presenting that to a UX group to get, again, a different perspective. Like, I'm giving my perspective on UX to UX folks, and I'm hearing their perspective, and that just adds to the thing. And as I finished that lightning talk, I felt like I had more contents that I could bring together to put it into a whole, or develop it into a whole, full-blown talk, which is this talk here. So let's keep on going and start with, what is BDD? What is behavior-driven development? Depending on where I was in my journey, I would give you a different answer. Depending on where you are in your journey, you may also give a different answer. I've looked at BDD originally, or initially, as, hey, it's something that I can use to replace TDD. That was my idea several years ago. It's like, oh no, now I'm doing BDD all the way. I don't do TDD anymore, which was one way to look at it. Later, I've learned that I was wrong thinking that way, but I had to go through that experience myself to understand why. Is it a coding practice? Like, how tightly coupled to coding is BDD? When I first started, it was very tightly coupled. It took me a while to learn that, nope, you're starting from a coding perspective, but there are other perspectives as far as BDD is concerned that you should take into account. Well, I didn't know that before. Is it a process, like a step-by-step way to do something? Or is it a methodology, a way to do something? Eventually, I've learned that, yeah, BDD, if you go by the book, it's a methodology, right? It's a way that we can follow to build software. Now, how do we do BDD? Questions that I know came up for me when I started with that was, do we need tools? And it's interesting after all these years that when I've been talking to folks about BDD, I've heard something like, oh, I cannot do BDD in my current project because we cannot integrate it in our CI/CD pipeline. Like, well, that does not resonate with me anymore. It used to, not anymore. And then I pull up a napkin and I say, here, let's do BDD together. Napkin, pen and paper, and I start writing like a user story, and then a series of like given, when, then, gherkin language to describe what we're after. And I'm just using napkin and a pen without tools necessary. But that didn't come until much later on in my own journey. Maybe you're already starting from another perspective, which is outstanding, but different people will arrive at it from different perspectives. And that's why I wanted to highlight some of these. When do we do it? At which point in a project life cycle do we do BDD? Do we do before we sign off on the project, or do we do as we are building the initial product backlog, or do we do when we are refining the backlog, or do we do when we are planning, right? Doing sprint planning. At what point in time do we do? I've done over the years at several one of those, and right now I see it as in when we do it, it depends quite a lot based on who are the people involved with the project. And then that comes to another question that's often comes up is who does it? Who's the person having those conversations around how do we write our user stories? How do we write our acceptance criteria? What format do we use when we're writing acceptance criteria? Like who is that person? That has also varied for me. It has gone from or through having product owners doing it, having business analysts doing it, having QA folks doing it, having developers doing it, having everybody doing it, which is to me, it's like the most satisfying situation is when we can get everybody who's working together on building something, get everybody with that behavior-driven development mindset. And we're going to revisit that in just a little bit. So we talked about what, we talked about how, now we're talking about why. Like, why do we do BDD? It took me a while to get to the realization, and today I can tell you that I do BDD because it improves communication and collaboration when I'm trying to build the right thing. Not just when I'm building things, I need to have those conversations, but I want to make sure that I'm building the right thing. The team wants to make sure that we are building the right thing. The businesses that we are serving, the people that we are serving, they want to make sure that we are building the right thing. So through BDD, I've learned to improve communication, improve collaboration, for the sake of making sure that we are all on the same page, we're building the right thing. Now, we did what, we did how, we did why. One of the books that I've read years ago is the book called Start with Why. So instead of going what you do, how you do, why you do it, start with the why. That is the single most important question we should answer. Everything else is just helping you achieve that why. And throughout this talk, I'm going to be mentioning like several of these books and now how I've made those connections. If you've read those books that I'm going to be mentioning, maybe you haven't made those connections the same way I'm doing. So hopefully that's going to bring you another perspective, and even like this thought of, oh, maybe I should revisit that book and, review my notes on it and my thoughts on it and see what kind of connections you make. And please, afterwards, do share those, reach out to me. I have my contact information that showed up, and it's going to come up later in the talk as well. Moving on from there, so one of the key aspects of Start With Why by Simon Sinek is this concept of a golden circle. And if you look up, like on YouTube, you're going to find like a short, abridged version of his talk on Start With Why, where he goes over his thought process around the golden circle. And here's going to be like just my way to explain it with my own peculiar accents. In the center, he has his why. That's where we want to start from. Outside of that, you have your how. And on the outer layer, you have your what. A lot of people start from the what. They have a very strong focus on what they are doing. And when you ask them why, they stumble. And it should be the other way around. You should have a very strong why, like, this is why I'm doing this. This is how I'm approaching that. And the how, you can have many hows to achieve your same why. You can experiment with different hows to make sure that that you're using the approaches that will yield the best value for your why. And the what. that comes from all of that. So with that mindset, I started pretty much applying this framework to everything that I'm doing. If I'm doing something which is a what, I need to constantly be able to take a step back, look up and say, why am I doing this? Right? Because somebody said it's as long as you're aiming in the right direction or you're facing the right direction, all you have to do is to keep pedaling. Well, so instead of like being heads down, pedaling, 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 every once in a while, you should be able to look up and make sure that you are facing the right direction and you know why you want to get to that direction, right? Is that still the right direction? Is that where I want to get to? So with all of those, I went back to my own BDD journey to understand, okay, I know that I do the BDD thing. What, how, why? So the way it started for me, it started from the what. Sometimes we don't know why we want to do something. We just want to do the something, right? Or we were pushed into doing the something, however you got to it. So at the time, I was writing tests. I was writing automated tests, which I thought were unit tests, but they were actually more of integration tests. Uh, and then I got more and more experienced with it. And then part of my point of entry into BDD was, oh, we don't call those tests anymore. We call them specs because we use them to specify something. So, okay, we don't name the classes test anymore. We name the classes specs. It's what we are doing. And I bought into that. It's like, okay, that sounds, it's resonating. And that was 2006 or 7, memory serves me right. Then I looked at the how I was writing those tests. So eventually, I know I morphed into the whole, instead of writing tests after the fact, I started writing them before the fact, following what a test-driven design or test-driven development preaches, right? You write the test first. So I was already writing the test first. That's how I was doing my what's. And then I learned to do it in the BDD style, which essentially changed the way I worded those tests. That was the main thing. It's just how I'm wording those tests. So instead of having arrange, act, assert, I had given, when, then. It was just a change of like wording, which was a very important shift. But at the time, I didn't like pay or put a lot of thought into it. It's like, okay, it makes sense. Instead of seeing my arrange, act, assert in whatever programming language, I'm seeing given, when, thens in the spoken language that I use to communicate with others. It was a very important shift. And then from there, I got to my why. It's like, why do I do those things? After doing those for a while, eventually I've gone from I'm writing my tests to make sure that my code works to I'm writing these specs to describe the desired outcome for the people that I'm serving. And to do that, so part of the why, improved collaboration and communication to deliver needs, what the people need, not necessarily what they want, but what they actually need. So through BDD, I got many steps closer to that big why in the center of my golden circle. So from there, many years ago, I think this book, Specification by Example, was written like 12, 13 years ago or so. And it had been on my radar. Different people had mentioned it, but I hadn't read it until sometime last year, I think. Great book. I totally recommend if you have interest in the subject, read that book. I enjoyed it because it has many interviews that the author, Goiko, I forgot his name or how to say his name, Ajit. It's hard for me to pronounce it, but Goiko, great author. So he did several interviews with different people and different teams talking about their journey getting to BDD and a lot of their different challenges and realizations. It resonated with me. It's like, yes, and yes, and yes. So it was good to see like different people arriving to very similar realizations, but coming through different perspectives. So I recommend, if you don't have that book on your list, add it there. A good one. The next book that or another book that I've read that I somehow drew some similarities was the book called Atomic Habits by James Clear. Part of that book, or even before he released that book, there were some blog posts he put out that already had resonated with me, where he talks about layers of behavior change, behavior-driven development, behavior change. Is that just a coincidence that there's that word there making the connection, at least in my mind? Part of what he talks about in layers of behavior change, he has also this thought process of having an identity at the center of your universe, if you will, right? So if you have habits, your habits are part of your identity, right? Whether they're bad or good habits, I mean, that's how you judge that. In my mind, it's based on what your values are. The fact is, you have habits that are associated to your identity, right? And we can shift those if we do want to shift them. Outside of identity, he says we have processes that we follow that are linked to that identity. And then on the outside of that, you have the outcomes. So a lot of people think about the things that they do, right? The outcomes of the thing that they do without thinking much of the process or the identity. Like I do that person because I'm the kind of person who yada, 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 right? That's the identity, the process, the outcome. So I started seeing that, putting it back to BDD, like, okay, how does this relate to BDD in my mind? Well, the outcomes would be the living documentation of the system that I'm building through specs or tests, however you want to call them. But that was the outcome, living documentation for the thing that I'm building. My current interpretation of what we are building and the reasons why we're building those things. The process or the processes, BDD, TDD, depending on where I am in the, like, say I'm implementing a feature, I'll start with BDD, and then the closer I get to code, I'm going to go into TDD mode where I'm designing how I'm going to achieve that behavior described by BDD. So that's my process. The identity, after so many years of doing that, I just realized that I'm the person who thinks BDD/TDD first, right? Because I need that improved collaboration and communication to deliver needs. And then I've learned that it's like people will ask, so do you always do TDD? No. Do you always do BDD? Yes. Because again, for BDD, I can grab a napkin and a pen and I can write down given, when, then. So I'll be the person who will always go and say, okay, I'm not understanding the problem domain here. Hold on. What am I given? What is the context? When, what's happening? What's the trigger? Then what do we expect out of it? And sometimes I may go the other way around. Let's start with the then part. Like, what is the output of that, the outcome of that? And then let me work my way, back out. It's like, how do we want to achieve that with a when? And what are we given, right? It's another way to look at it. So as I started going like down that road, I thought, what if we combine the two? Simon Sinek's Golden Circle with the Layers of Behavior Change by James Clear. Think about it. On the left, we have the why. On the right, we have the identity. In my mind, they go together, right? Why you do something is related to your identity. And you may shape your identity based on your why. So as I ponder over that, like chicken and the egg kind of situation, because they actually walk hand in hand. You learn a new why, you reshape your identity, right? And you want to change something in your identity, you find different whys and you keep taking steps together like that, always rebalancing. As you walk, you're always rebalancing. And then you take one step further, you have how and you have processes. and then you have what, and you have outcomes. So I started seeing those in parallel. Why, identity, how, processes, what, outcomes, right? They do go hand in hand, at least in my mind. As I said, it's my perspective over this. Hopefully you can get something out of it yourself. Let me see, did I skip? Yeah, good. Let me take another step. And by the way, should you have any questions, please use the Q&A feature there. I'm going to be asking Mike whenever those questions come up and find a good spot to take those as we go. Otherwise, I'll keep talking because this is something I'm passionate about and I have a lot of thoughts that I would like to share. That's what we're here for. Why do I care about some of these things? Why do I spend so much time thinking about that? Well, several years ago, I've read the book Domain Driven Design, the blue book, the blue DDD book, if you will, by Eric Evans. And in that book, he talks about core and supporting domains. So let's say that you have a core, you have some sort of business domain where you have different domains within it. You have maybe your accounting, you have your sales, you have your inventory, you have services that you provide through that business. You have to understand and like do these analysis to understand for this business, what's core? Like maybe for a service company like improving, accounting, it's not part of what we sell really. It's a supporting domain for our business domain. For other companies, maybe sales is a supporting domain, while accounting is the core of what they do. So it's important to know that, to know like when we have to make decisions, when we have to prioritize, you know, what chunks of our business will get the most of our time and attention and resources and effort. That's what you're going to use to guide your efforts. So I learned that in domain-driven design. And then in a book club with a few fellow improvers 2 years ago or so, we read Brené Brown's Dare to Lead. As part of that book, she talked about values, identifying your values, being able to narrow down the things that you take as your personal values and purpose to make sure that you're prioritizing those things in life. And you cannot say, oh, I value like 100 different things, because then there's no priorities. It's like in a business project where what's the priority? Oh, everything is high priority. Well, if everything is high priority, then there's no priority. It's chaos, right? So that's where it started resonating with me. And what I did from that was to list out and understand what my personal values are. And I kind of like drew from BDD's concept of core domains, supporting domains. And I thought, what are my core values? What are my supporting values? Like values that they are not core to my essence, but I consider them because they support my core value. And then I identified what you see on the screen right now. So I'm going from like Brené Brown's Dare to Lead values to BDD domain concepts, and I draw this parallel there. Now, why is that important, or why do I think that is important? Well, once I understand why I do things, it makes it easier for me to focus on what's important. So focusing is one thing. Another thing is, if I understand why other people do what they do, hopefully it will help me deliver to them what they need. It may help me understand, well, they are saying that they want this, but if I understand what their values are, I might say, I can see why you say you want that, but what about this? I think what you actually need is this other thing. And many times it has been like, yep, that's exactly right. Thanks for looking after, you know, what's really important to me, even when I lose track of that, right? So it, by having this kind of a notion, it has helped me again collaborate and communicate with other through this kind of perspective. Good. Okay, before I move on, is there any question, Mike, so far?
Not yet. There is a request. Are you going to share the slides?
Absolutely. Yes, I will absolutely put out the slides. What I'll do is for the tool that I'm using for the slide stuff, I'm going to spit out a PDF with this content, but I'm making note of that here, and I will find a way to reach out to the attendees and put that out somehow. Trying to think. I may
Awesome.
do
Thank
it
you.
through my blog. Yes, absolutely. Thanks, Mike. All right, cool. Let's keep on going. User stories is our next stop here. So when we think of user stories, or when we learn about user stories, most people will learn the typical template as some type of user. I want to do something so that yada yada yada. That so that part is the most important part of the user story. So why not start with why, right? So instead of as I want to so that, take that so that, make that the first sentence. You may reword it as in order to, this is it. This is the whole reason for that story to exist. This is why that story exists. Start with why. Now, with that said, the most important thing is to have the conversation. It's not the, oh, let me twist everybody's arms to flip those sentences around. No, it's more to understand that, are we having the conversation about the most important thing first, which is the why? If we have the I want to come up before other things, people will spend a lot of time talking about what they want, which may not be what they need. And sometimes by having this kind of conversation, sometimes we are actually able to deliver what people want while sliding in what they need, right? Sometimes it's that balance. Can we give them both? If we can, that's even better. If we can't, people will appreciate if they see that we have the intent of delivering what they actually need, because sometimes it's not clear to them, right? And to us. When I say them, I mean it's to us. Many times I've done things that's like, oh, I want this, and then later I realize, yeah, I wanted that. I know I wanted that, but actually what I needed is something else. I was just not aware of it. So if I have somebody else covering that blind spot for me, that's great, right? Strategic partners. That's what some of us consultants are here for. So it's a very interesting idea that I got from another one of Goiko's book, 50 Quick Ideas to Improve Your User Stories. Very short read, exactly what the title says, 50 ideas for you to improve your user stories. One of the ideas that he proposes there, which I think, yeah, this is actually great. It's something very similar to what I've been doing myself. You get the business to write up in order to. Maybe they're not going to flush out all the different parts of the user story, but get them to start with the in order to. I've been in situations where the business could not finish that sentence. So, hello, business, we really want to help you. We don't want to spend your money if you cannot finish a sentence in English to explain why you want something. Let's not spend any time or resources on that. Let's finish that sentence first. So then we get that very focused, narrowly focused one sentence. Get that out of the business. So that's the why. The how is the I want to part of the story. Like, in order to achieve that why, I want to do X, Y, and Z. So something interesting that also came from that last book I just referred was to have the delivery team actually write out a few I want to versions. So that instead of committing immediately to a way to achieve that why, write, a few I want to do this, or I want to do that, and let the delivery team come up with some ideas, because sometimes we get user stories from the business that's like, well, the I want to part is very prescriptive on how it should be done, and it may have some sort of a bias just because the business does not know of the possibilities or even the cost and risk associated with doing something. Maybe the delivery team can jump in and say, well, yes, you're saying you want this, but we can do it in this other manner here that's going to be cheaper or faster, or that's going to better prepare us for another story that we know is coming up in the near future. So you get to have these kind of conversations. So it's another thing that you get to practice. Again, it's just words on a piece of paper maybe, or in some digital system, but it's the conversation that comes around it that's going to yield value to everybody involved. Okay, before I move on to the next one, Mike, any question popped up?
We do have used BDD tests to help developers understand stakeholders' vision, to help stakeholders make their vision clear. If so, what are a few techniques you've used?
All right, so let's thanks for relaying the question. So let me think through it. So have you used BDD tests to help developers understand stakeholders' vision? Absolutely. I have absolutely done that. And one way that's there are a few ways that I've done that over the years, depending on the level of understanding of the people involved in the project about BDD. I've had situations where the business analyst or the product owner, they were not familiar with like writing given when then type of story, or even user stories that would focus on the business value, not on implementation details. So I would coach them first. Like I would offer like rewriting the story. Like I would pick the story out of the board and say, okay, I'm having a hard time understand the value. Can we have a conversation about that? And sometimes I would say, okay, now that I understand, here, I would rewrite the story and say, would this rewritten version of the story make sense to the business? And oftentimes they go like, oh, thanks. Yeah, that's absolutely what we meant. Does that help the development team make more progress if we write it in that way? I said, well, my question is probably the team's questions as well. So I think, yes, that would help. So that's one approach there. Another approach is getting the QA people involved when, as a developer, when I pick a story out of the board, if the story does not have acceptance criteria in the shape of given when then, I'm going to walk up to the QA person and say, hey, can we pair on this for a little bit? Maybe set, a time boxed, window to pair on that. And then the QA person will go like, oh, I don't know how to write code. I just know how to test it. How can we pair? I said, well, you see this story here? How are you going to be testing that? Like how are you going to go into the system, and what do you need to set up? What do you expect to see on the screen? Whenever us developers, we say the story is done, go ahead and start like saying, doing some manual tests. How are you going to be going about that? The person will start describing that. I'm going to walk up maybe to the board and go, the person will say, oh, I need to set up a user who's an accountant. So I'm going to go like, given I am an accountant, what else? Well, I need to set up some bank accounts. That's a checking account and a savings account. Oh, and so given I'm an accountant and a checking account, and so I'm going to start like listing those as the person is talking. And then I'll point out and say, does that describe what you just said? They'll go like, yeah, that's pretty much it. Why are you doing that? And then I'll show to that person. Now I'm going to turn that, what we came up with together, and I'm going to write tests written in that manner. I'm going to use exactly that wording in my, say, if it's a backend type of test, in my C# test, right? Maybe those are business rules that we are going to be verifying. I'm going to write that, and they're going to see C# code with the braces and all, but with the conversation we just had, right? Same thing later, once I'm done implementing the feature, I'm going to ask another developer to do a code review. Say, hey, can you do a code review on this code? Make sure I'm not missing anything. And start by reading the story, then read the acceptance criteria, then read my tests. When they read the test, they can trace back to why have I made those code changes to begin with, which is, one of the most important things here, because just like reading my code to say, oh, you're not checking for nulls here, you're not checking for some boundaries here. You're reading the code, the what, the outcome, but you are not understanding why. So I will tell them, look at the story first, acceptance criteria, the tests I have for that user story, ask questions if you have questions about that, and then you look at the code. So by taking this approach, I've been able to coach developers who were not familiar with BDD, or maybe they had tried BDD before, but they didn't have like somebody coaching them along the way, and they gave up along the way. By doing this approach where they just always see me as the person who will walk up to the board and write given when then as people are talking, and then I'm going to show people, here are the tests that I wrote based on those conversations. That's how I've been able to coach both the business, to coach them into like thinking or framing their thoughts in that manner, as well as why is it important for developers to also understand to use that kind of language, right? So I hope that's answered the question. Let's take a few more steps forward. Okay, what? So we talked about the why. In order to of a story, we talked about the how, right? I want to do something, right? That's how we want to achieve that goal. And then the what I started seeing as the given when then parts. That would be the outcome of that story that has a why, has a what, a how, right? And then a what, how we're gonna get to those outcomes, given what is the context, when, what is it that's happening, then what is the desired outcome of that. That takes me to another thought about BDD. I often see BDD described as a methodology to describe systems behavior. And now I have a beef with that, because are we really describing the behavior of the system? It's kind of an odd proposition. People should be the focus, not the system. It's behavior from the standpoint of people, the people who that product or software is serving. Because when we focus on the system behavior, we end up having user stories written in the manner of like, in order to, as a system. Has anybody else seen stories like that? I have, right? Where the user story literally says as a system. And then how do people justify? Oh, that's a technical story. It's a technical debt story. Even when that is the case, where maybe the technical debt story is because, oh, that part of the system is a little bit slow. It's not as performant. So it's a technical story to improve performance. Okay, I do see that the implementation involves, technical concept, but why is that important? Why is it important that that thing takes 3 seconds as opposed to half a second? Well, it's because when, on that part of the system, we may lose customers because, if it takes them too long to check out their shopping cart, it's like that is your value. That's why you need that story. It's not really a technical story, right? It's a story that's going to bring value. Why? Because there's a behavior, people's behavior. If we are adding stuff to our shopping cart and it takes a while to check out, so we may say, I don't need that thing anyways. I'm going to go do something else. That's my behavior as a person. So user stories and behavior-driven development should, in my mind, be seen from that focus, starting from the person's perspective first. And then you look inward. Once you understand why are we doing this for the behaviors associated with people, then we say, okay, we're going to build a system that's going to help with that behavior or prevent that behavior by implementing the following thing. And then we can say, I'm creating a component for which the desired behavior is X, Y, and Z. Then you describe the behavior of the component. But we don't start there. we start with people, because without people, there's no need for systems, right? That was a huge switch in my mind that came from doing these comparisons. Another thing that somehow got entangled in my mind with this, or maybe clarified, was the layers of behavior change from Atomic Habits and things that I've learned from this other amazing book, Badass Making Users Awesome, which is a book somewhat about UX, but it talks about humans' behavior and how we learn, right? And how much attention do we put in things, and when do we stop putting attention into things? So it has to do with behavior as well. Two connections there, or a connection between those two books as well. So going back to like stories and behavior, if we look at the in order to part of a story, and we think that of that in terms of people's behavior, not system behavior. So in terms of people's behavior, you might want to start thinking about, maybe you want to prevent certain behavior from happening. Maybe people feel anxious while waiting for a taxi waiting outside. Then somebody invents Uber or Lyft, right? To address that situation that people feel anxious, having to wait on something, having to know, how am I going to pay for my cab ride, right? Are they going to take the most optimal way to get to my destination? Those are behaviors, people's behavior, that were addressed through services and software. Can we write our in order to stories keeping that concept in mind? Maybe we want to encourage certain behavior because we know humans we have a tendency to fall into certain behaviors that may or may not be good, right? And maybe we want to encourage a better behavior when presented with a certain situation that through data, through code, we might know what that situation is. Maybe we want to enforce certain behavior. Maybe it's necessary for the business, the organization to achieve their goals. We need to enforce certain behaviors. Maybe we want to nudge people into a certain behavior, right? So think of things that, frequent things that people, might mistake, like mistakes that people make, or questions that people have, or things that people tend to forget. Like you add stuff to your shopping cart and then you go do something else. And then 3 weeks later, you go back and you see you left stuff in the shopping cart. As the business owner, maybe you want to nudge people to say, hey, you've added this thing to the shopping cart, 3 days ago. Are you still looking into it? Is there anything we can do to help you decide on whether that's the best thing for you or not? Give people the options, right? Based on the things that you know from human behavior. Looking at frequent mistakes, something that happens to me a lot. I was born in Brazil, metric system. 20 plus years in the US, I still cannot think in terms of pounds, in terms of gallons, in terms of miles, right? It does not compute because I didn't use those measurements growing up. So it's not like ingrained in my brain. So I do make frequent mistakes, like poorly estimating, like, oh, is that a heavy thing to lift or not? If I'm seeing the weight in pounds, I have a hard time. It's like, is that light or heavy? And then I have to make the translation in my mind before like trying to pull it and then messing up with my bag. Some other things that come up is like frequently asked question. Again, using myself as an example. If somebody asks me to go, pick something up at the warehouse for them and they say, hey, Claudio, can you go pick up some cilantro for us? Well, I'm not a veggie type of guy. I don't even know what a cilantro looks like. So I would likely fail that task. Well, imagine here like an analogous system where at the warehouse, they've put the name of the product and they put an image of the product. So you have like as much information you need not to make that mistake, because maybe you only have the name of the thing you have to pick. Maybe somebody gave you, hey, I have this green thing here. Can you pick some more of this at the warehouse? Like, I don't know what that is. Let me look for a photo and say, oh, it looks like that. Oh, it's called cilantro. Yeah, let me pick some. Very easy analogous system to address frequently asked questions or mistakes. What if we build software with that in mind? What are the mistakes that people normally make? What do they have on hand? Maybe we build screens and features that will take that into account, prevent errors, prevent losses, preventing, sadness or unhappiness of people trying to interact with others in that business due to mistakes like that. Outstanding. Let's see. Frequently forgotten. So things that people normally forget. If you want to look at like two great books about going beyond the happy path scenarios when you're thinking about user stories, these two books, the quick ideas to improve your tests, as well as writing great specifications, they go a little bit deeper into the different paths. Like besides happy path, what else do you have? So some of them that they mention is like the angry path. For instance, you go fill out some sort of form on a website, you spend 40 minutes doing that, you get to the last page and you hit submit, and then you're presented with a server error. Your data could not be saved. Please try again later, and all your data is lost. That's the angry path. If that happens, what does that mean to the business or to the people that you're serving? Are they going away to the competitors, or are they going to be very unhappy and talk bad things about the service that you're trying to provide? You need to think about those. The greedy path, like somebody who goes into the screen and they check every single checkbox and they fill out every single thing on that screen. Is a system designed for that? Or is a system designed to say, well, if people check these checkboxes here, they're unlikely to hit this part of the page. So you got to think along those lines as well. The forgetful path. Where is it that people tend to like do things and forget that you are doing it because you're doing something else, like adding something to a shopping cart? And some others like that. So make sure to have a look at these books. Again, you don't need to cover every single one of those paths, but you should be aware of those questions so that as you get user stories and you're supposed to have conversations with the product owners, with the stakeholders, you can come up with questions around this like, well, would people be unhappy or angry if something happened? And if that's a problem, okay, maybe we need to account for that. Like, how are we going to solve those problems? All right. As we talk about that, we touch on empathy, mindfulness, inclusivity. So the way I look at it is empathy. When, as software developers, we are coding, like implementing something, we have our nice noise canceling headphones playing our favorite music. We have 3 or 4 big monitors or one really big one, nice ergonomics around us. Great. Well, the people we are building software for, they may not have any of that. Maybe what they have is yelling customers right in front of them. That's their experience. That's where empathy comes from, for us to step away from our desk to go meet the people we are serving and understand what are they often going through. Where are they getting angry with the system, or maybe not that they are angry with the system, somebody else is angry at them, and now they're trying to use the system and the system is not giving what they need to help out that person who's angry, and then they get angry and they're going to get angry at whoever was whoever built that software. So like stepping away from our comfort zone and go meet the people who we are serving. Mindfulness is being aware of what they have in the moment when they're trying to accomplish one task, not everything. Like they have this one task that they have to do every day, and when they do have to do that, they have somebody who's very angry that they are trying to serve. What do they have on hand? Do they have sticky notes around their screen for data that is in the system, but the system does not make it easy to find, so they have to write it and put it on their monitors? Do they have, maybe a driver license, or maybe they have a passport, or maybe it's like, what do they have in front of them that you should be mindful of when you're building the system to make sure that you are giving the best value for that person who's interacting with our system to serve somebody on their own? Inclusivity, taking into account the different cultures and backgrounds, the different expectations and thought processes that people have. As I said, for me, growing up in Brazil, I do not think, or I do not problem solve things the same way that my friends who were born and raised in Houston, for instance, do, right? We address problems from different perspectives. We, as I said, we are driving down the road. In order to know if I'm going too fast or too slow, it's natural for me to see it in terms of kilometers per hour, not miles per hour, right? For somebody who was born and raised around here, it's the other way around. If somebody is working with your system and they think first and foremost metric system, and your system can only display things in the imperial system, that person is bound to make mistakes. Can't you just make the system configurable based on the user's preference so that they will interact with the system in the way that's the most natural to them, right? And then have the system figure out. I mean, writing conversions to go from one system to another, that's easy. That's what computers are good for, right? People's behavior, system behavior. Let's make sure that we understand what those are. And last but not least, as we're approaching a spot to wrap things up and then open up for some final questions that you guys might have. So I've put that all together as you see, the books, my notes, and how I draw those thoughts, those connections between thoughts or things that I've learned. There's one book that went missing from the list that I had. Here at Improving, we're very big on trust, like building trust amongst ourselves, with our stakeholders, our clients. So we are very familiar with the books, The Speed of Trust, which talks about trust behaviors. Remember behaviors? And then I was reading Badass Making Users Awesome. Look at this one page. You have like a photo of my book to show you. At the top, I wrote, once you're aware of something, you see it everywhere. That quote came to mind because since I'm aware of trust behaviors, now I kind of see that everywhere. So as I was reading this, like I highlighted some passages on that book and I'm like, oh, that is confront reality, which is a trust behavior. This bit here is talking straight, which is another trust behavior. Create transparency, setting expectation. From a standpoint of like user experience, and then drawing those connections. So for me to understand or to see these topics, UX, trust, behavior-driven development, why, and seeing those through certain perspectives and looking around it to see how can I best leverage this kind of knowledge and skill, and it turns into wisdom. This is how I've been doing it. This has been my perspective, or some of them, in this topic. So we have 2 minutes left. Please, if you have any questions, drop it in the Q&A feature. I'll sit around here for a little bit.
Yeah, we don't have any right now. A comment from Dan thanking you for a great presentation.
You're very welcome.
Yeah, glad Dan came. It was always good to hear from Dan. But thanks, Claudio, for a great presentation. Thank you for sharing your knowledge and experience with us.
My pleasure.
And also thanks to all the attendees for coming. You're the reason we do this every week. So thanks for coming. Next week, Improving's Director of Engineering, Don Sawyer, will talk about integrating test automation into data pipeline development. You can also go to improving.com and click the Thoughts menu item, and you'll see the list of upcoming Improving talks with registration links. These talks are absolutely free, so please take advantage of them. Again, thanks everybody for coming. We hope to see you again next Wednesday, and until then, have a great week.